The Pastoral Sonata is the most Schubertian in sound world of all the Beethoven sonatas and travels through far-reaching key zones. Although on the whole peaceful and reflective, the dramatic working out of the first movement, the melancholy and somber second movement, and the climactic moments of the fourth movement suggest the transformed and more starkly contrasted characters between storm and idyll of pastoral music brought to an apex in the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony. So the key structure of the Pastoral Sonata is D major for the first movement, an Allegro, D minor for the Andante second movement, D major for the Scherzo and trio, and D major for the fourth movement, Allegro ma non troppo. First time Beethoven uses this tempo indication in all his works up until that time. So the first movement opens with a cadential theme of a sort of timpani strike in a perpetual fashion on the D. And now this is a type of pedal point technique which also happens in the Pastoral Symphony and in the Beethoven Violin Concerto to exemplify this feeling of percussion and rudimentary quality of the pastoral aspect. On top of this, we have a beautiful melody in the right hand, which kind of descends in a meditative and spirited fashion. And it is in a 10-bar opening phrase, as opposed to the 4 square phrases that we are accustomed to with Beethoven. Let's listen. That was 10 bars. We are in triple meter, so we have, if I want to speak aloud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This segment always reminds me of a song by the Beatles from their album Help. See if you can recognize it. Hey, you got to hide your love away. Another interesting thing about this opening fragment is the use of sforzandi on third beats. And you already have it in this little part, the one I was just alluding to. It's used in a way which kind of intensifies the lyrical quality of the melody, not so much for an accent, which we usually associate this sforzandi. Okay, moving along, this theme itself will be kind of used as a genesis for a process which Beethoven uses called Foreshortening Technique, where he begins to dismantle parts of the theme, and over time we're left with smaller and smaller fragments as we move into the development. So the fragment which will be eventually cut off and developed in various tonalities in the development section is the very ending. So in the development, for example, we can see those two ideas already being used. If we remember this one, so he's taking them out and creating harmonic versions in different keys with accompanimental storms in the left hand. So moving into the second thematic zone, we have more of a dance-like theme here with punctuations on the second and third beats. And we end up on the far away key area of C sharp major, which is quite far removed from D major in the circle of fifths. So D major is only 2 sharps, whereas C sharp major is the full 7 sharps. So 5 groups away, which is quite unique and remarkable for this second theme. But then eventually it brings us back to the dominant. See there that I was moving through sforzando type movements there, giving him more of a push of a lyrical nature rather than as a simple dynamic accent. So in the development section, the technique of foreshortening deconstructs the theme completely until we're left with only little fragments and finally just one note, and we arrive on the remote key of F sharp major for a sort of touchdown. Let's have a look. There's the F sharp major arrival, and we went through the different deconstructions, such as and then we did it in the left hand and octaves, and then we had a few sections and then an E, and then after continuously moved up by note, all the while the left hand is continuously in counterpoint in a type of storm-like agitation, bringing us to the concluding moments of the development in the faraway key of F sharp major. which at first is dramatic and stormy, but then suddenly breaks off, transforms itself into a spiritual area of contemplation, bringing in a lilting pastoral triple-like dance, thematic dance motive, which we see also in the final movement of the sonata. So So the F sharp major key is very particular, especially in the Romantic period and beyond, to be associated with something divine. It's sort of called the beatific key, used in spiritual and religious works. For example, it is the theme of God in Messiaen's Vent Regard. And here when we arrive, that left hand descent in the triple meter had not been used in this movement and will not be used again. It's only kind of a reference to what happens in the original theme of the fourth movement. This type of drone quality to it. So after we finish this F sharp major moment, we get a linking back to the beginning. So this linking theme is also quite pastoral-like, and it comes back as a closing theme to the recapitulation and the exposition. The first movement ends with a little coda. So using those forzandos on those top notes and a little bit of a lilt with the pedal points there and a nice simple dominant tonic in piano to finish. The second movement, here it's very somber and melancholic. The most of the sadness from the Pastoral Sonata is here in this movement, but only in the outer ternary sections. The middle section is returned to the cheerful bird-like qualities which you will see. The interesting thing about the slow movement main themes, it's a type of a march or a chorale over top of a pizzicato left hand. And Czerny, he was mentioning that it's like a ballad of a bygone age. theme repeated, and the second theme back into the first theme. Afterwards, when we have the middle part of the movement, happiness sets in with the bird songs. Now when the return of the A section happens, so this would be the B section, happy B section, then there's a variation technique Beethoven uses. And he uses this to sort of improvise over top of the steady left hand. And then he brings in the coda. And here we can see the coda really using integral technique of Beethoven, which is a crescendo from piano. And in the last moment, you cut back to another piano, subito. So suddenly into a piano. So this is in the coda directly, and you can feel the phrases moving into a louder crescendo, but then suddenly cutting back for the final chord. After this we have the bird calls in the minor mode. And those are the bird calls which I was alluding to as perhaps being parallel with the finale of the Pastoral Symphony second movement, where there indeed is an actual representation of larks and nightingales at the final moments of that movement. So here we have these type of figures that could be interpreted as the bird calls, which would finish this movement here. So quite a tragic ending to this movement. You can see how he spreads the movement up over the registers from the very low bass where the scale is finished. He pulls up these very daunting sighs. All the way to the final dissonance. To the barren resolution. Moving into the third movement, here it's also in a ternary form, And now we're back to the sunshine and to the rustic elements of a village dance. And we have a type of a call and response idea for the first part of the form here, where you have open octaves, presumably played by different instruments, because Beethoven labels a dynamic under each of the notes. So the only logical explanation for that is to imagine a different texture for each of those moments. So starting with the piano, so very soft notes. And the response is like a string quartet moving through a very simple harmony. And then after he does the same, but this time with a forte, so in doubled in thirds, and identified forte under each of the presentations of the octaves. And now in sixths. After he develops this, then he comes back, and in the middle part of this movement, the trio, we're presented with a melancholy theme in B minor, which will then be harmonized in 4 different ways. So the theme itself has a very active left hand in broken octaves. And then we return back to the fourth movement, marked Allegro ma non troppo. As I mentioned, the first time Beethoven had used this indication up until now in his output, which means he didn't want this to be too fast. He still wanted it to be a little bit more comfortable to accommodate the changing of the drones and the bass line. So the left-hand theme is very important here. The transitional material linking the ground bass drone theme that we have is very familiar. If you listen to the motive itself, and we just take it apart only based on its harmonies, so it's the same harmonic structure as Pachelbel's canon. And that's also very important because pastoral music tends to incorporate a lot of Yuletide Christmas material, sort of to generate the idea of the pagan traditions transforming into the Christian traditions. So here we have a harmonic representation of that. And that leads us into our second theme. Again, very pastoral in the sense of the bird calls, and they are brought in canon, as a matter of fact. And this one eventually brings us to a bit of a climax of the first section with broken scales. return after this mini storm. To the second presentation of the Rondo. This time the Rondo breaks off to a different direction in development, and that is a sort of a pointillistic texture, a little bit more fragmentary, using more of these leaps in the left hand. And finally, a completely different texture emerges, and this is a polyphonic type of writing, which is reminiscent of Beethoven's late period, as a matter of fact, and his use of contrapunctal methods would have been used by Bach. Let's just start with this pointillistic leading into the polyphonic. Continues to grow in this dramatic fashion through the second most powerful of the climaxes into the broken octaves, and cascading down a bunch of scales, and returning to the opening theme again after the storm. For the final presentation of the Rondo and the recapitulation sequence. So the Coda is interesting in that it uses the pointillistic elements from the development in the right hand on top of the drone pedal points of the left hand theme in the subdominant. And then it stabilizes on the dominant harmony as a new pedal point, and it climbs up into the upper registers, and when it does arrive, it finally cascades back down, and you'll remember this as being the main motives of the fourth movement of the Opus 26 Sonata. So that's interesting that he plugs it back into this particular moment on the way to the end of this sonata. And when he does get to the bottom of the dominant preparation, he introduces a più Allegro passage on the final theme in octaves this time, with a very quick right hand. Sort of grand finale to this fourth movement of the Beethoven Pastoral Sonata, Opus 28.